All right, welcome to today's explainer. Right at this very second, you are participating in something so massive and so all-encompassing, it's almost hard to wrap your head around. Today, I want you to forget everything you thought you knew about quiet forests and peaceful little meadows. We really need to reframe how we look at nature. We're going to dive into ecosystem, but we're looking at it as an intense, high-stakes game of survival where absolutely every living thing, and yeah, that definitely includes you, is a player fighting for resources. It's a beautifully unforgiving machine, and today we're breaking down exactly how its mechanics work. But before we can understand the game, we've got to define the arena, right? The term ecosystem was actually coined by a scientist named A.G. Tansley. He realized nature wasn't just a random collection of animals and plants, but a highly dynamic, interactive grid. An ecosystem is literally the fundamental, functional unit of ecology. It's the exact place where the biotic, meaning the living players like plants, predators, and microbes, collide head-on with the abiotic, which are the non-living environmental forces like sunlight, water, and soil. Tansley gave us a word for this ultimate arena where these living and non-living forces constantly clash, collaborate, and ultimately sustain existence itself.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our quest log for today, mapped out perfectly to help you conquer your competitive exam prep. We're taking this down in 5 distinct stages. Stage 1, the arena. Stage 2, powering up. Stage 3, the recyclers. Stage 4, energy flow. And finally, Stage 5, the hierarchy. Level 1, the arena. Let's just quickly establish the absolute baseline rules of this biological system. Every single functioning ecosystem on planet Earth, whether we're talking about the deepest, darkest ocean trench, or literally just a tiny puddle in your backyard, runs on 4 major functional components. Think of these as the 4 load-bearing pillars holding up the entire survival system. You've got productivity, which is how energy enters the game in the first place. Then decomposition, which is how the system manages its waste. Next is energy flow, basically the currency moving between all the players. And finally, nutrient cycling, which ensures the physical building blocks of life are never permanently lost. If even one of these 4 pillars collapses, well, the entire system crashes. Moving right along to stage 2, powering up. Let's look at primary productivity and how this massive system actually generates the juice to keep its players alive.
And well, it pretty much all starts right here. Aside from a few really weird exceptions down in the deep, dark ocean, all the life, all the movement, and all the power scaling in this arena ultimately derives from one single vital source: sunlight. It is literally the unlimited battery that powers the entire grid. But here's the thing. Sunlight alone just isn't enough. It has to be captured, converted, and made usable by the producers. The plants and algae that act as the fundamental energy generators of our world.
And this brilliantly illustrates one of the absolute most critical concepts you need to grasp for your exams: the difference between gross primary productivity, or GPP, and net primary productivity, or NPP. I want you to imagine GPP as your gross salary. It's the total amount of solar energy loot the plants manage to capture and convert into organic matter. But remember, plants are living things too. They have to breathe, they have to survive day to day, and that costs energy. We call this physiological cost cellular respiration. So when you subtract the energy they burn for respiration away from that total GPP, you are left with the net primary productivity. NPP is your take-home pay. It is the actual available biomass left over for the next players in the game, the herbivores, to consume.
All right, stage 3, the recyclers. We are stepping out of the bright sunlight now and moving into the decomposition phase, the incredibly gritty, relentless process of breaking down the fallen. Let's see how this builds. Or actually, scratch that. Let's see how it deconstructs. When players die in this game, their stored resources absolutely cannot go to waste, so they enter the decomposition phase. It's kind of like descending into a dark dungeon where dead matter is systematically dismantled across 5 distinct stages. First up is fragmentation, where detritivores, like earthworms, physically chew up and break down the debris. Next is leaching, where water-soluble nutrients seep straight down into the soil. Third, we hit catabolism, where fungal and bacterial enzymes step in to chemically degrade whatever's left. This whole process leads to humification, which forms a super dark, nutrient-rich, and highly resistant layer called humus. And finally, we get mineralization, releasing those raw, inorganic nutrients right back into the arena for the plants to use all over again. It is a flawless, zero-waste recycling engine. Stage 4, energy flow and the 10% rule. All right, here is where we introduce the harsh, totally unforgiving mechanics of ascending the ranks and consuming power. Notice the absolute strictness of this system. Energy moves strictly in one direction. It is entirely unidirectional. It goes from the sun to the producers to the consumers. Energy never, ever flows backward. A predator obviously can't pass energy back to a herbivore, and a plant can't beam energy back to the sun. Once that energy is consumed, it relentlessly moves up the hierarchy, or it's just lost to the environment as heat.
And here it is. This is the most brutal rule of the entire game, the 10% rule. As energy moves up the food chain, say from a plant to a deer and then to a wolf, only about 10% of the energy from one trophic level actually transfers to the next. That means 90% of the energy is completely lost, mostly as heat, just from the organisms trying to stay alive. So if a plant has 1,000 units of energy, the herbivore that eats it only gets 100. The carnivore that manages to eat that herbivore, it gets just 10. This mathematically brutal reality is exactly why survival at the very top is so incredibly difficult, and why ecosystems can only support a really small number of apex predators.
Which brings us to level 5, the hierarchy. Let's mathematically map out the boss tier using ecological pyramids. Usually, when we talk about this, we picture these hierarchies as a standard pyramid, right? A massive base of plants at the bottom supporting slightly fewer herbivores, which in turn support even fewer predators at that tiny pointed top. But let me ask you a question that exam boards absolutely love to test. What happens to the system's strict laws when an ecological pyramid is turned completely upside down? Because yes, there are some pretty shocking exceptions to the rules. We call these system anomalies inverted pyramids, where the whole hierarchy gets turned right on its head. Picture a single massive oak tree in a forest. That is just one producer at the very bottom. But that single tree can support thousands of insects, which creates an inverted pyramid of numbers. Or look out at the ocean, where the biomass of tiny zooplankton actually outweighs the phytoplankton they eat. It seems impossible, but it happens simply because those phytoplankton reproduce and are consumed at such a rapid, frantic pace.
So, the crucial point here is understanding the 3 core metrics ecologists use to measure power and population: the pyramid of number, the pyramid of biomass, and the pyramid of energy. As we just saw, numbers and biomass can sometimes be inverted depending on the specific arena you're looking at, and please lock this into your memory for your exams, the pyramid of energy can never be inverted. Because of that brutal 10% rule we talked about earlier, energy is always lost as you move up. An inverted pyramid of energy literally violates the laws of physics. So, we've decoded the arena, the power systems, the recyclers, and the rigid hierarchies that govern all life on Earth. But I want to leave you with this final thought. Think for a second about human energy consumption. We don't just eat food, right? We consume fossil fuels, electricity, vast amounts of the entire Earth's primary productivity. In this beautifully balanced, strictly governed, and deeply unforgiving machine, where exactly do we sit? Are we still playing by the same rules of this ecosystem, or are we playing an entirely different game altogether? Think about what that means for the board we are all currently playing on, and I'll leave you to ponder your own power level. Keep studying, keep observing, and keep questioning the system.